I want to focus today on key current UK legislation and consider the implications of the Online Safety Bill 2021 for industry and other safety practice in the context of online harms and risks, which is a key issue at the moment. The UK is one of the first countries to introduce online safety legislation, which places a duty of care on industry to both understand and act to prevent online harms, particularly in relation to children and young people, and that's the focus of my talk today. A regulator has been appointed, Ofcom, and industry will for the first time be required to take a proactive role in the prevention of online harm. This is not to say, I hasten to add, that there is currently no good industry practice, because I know that some have worked proactively with law enforcement for many years in responding to the worst kind of harms. So, for example, online grooming and the collection and distribution of child abuse images. So yes, there's been little focus on other forms of harm, such as child exposure to adult pornography and harmful sites, such as those that promote suicide and self-harm. In this talk, I want to consider the challenges associated with regulation, introduce a new framework of risk and harm, and outline possible social and safety tech solutions. Great. So let's start by considering the legislation and just some key principles. I won't dwell too much on the detail. So the Online Safety Bill 2021 began life as the Online Harms Green Paper. And notice the change to a more neutral name. The key principles of the bill include a free, open and secure internet, the importance of freedom of expression online and privacy, but now with a focus on user safety and where criminal, terrorist and hostile foreign state activity is not left to contaminate the online space. So the encouragement of rules and norms for the internet that discourage harmful behaviour. There's a recognition in the legislation, the forthcoming legislation, that the UK is a thriving digital economy and has a prosperous ecosystem of companies developing innovation in online safety. And I want to talk a bit about the online safety tech industry later on. It also emphasises the importance of citizens who understand the risks of online activity and emphasises the importance of challenging unacceptable behaviours. There's reference to a global coalition of countries, recognition that the UK can't operate in isolation given the global nature of the internet. But the legislation also speaks about renewed public confidence and trust in online companies and services. So what are the implications for industry here? And I think this is really important. So the bill attempts to deal with the somewhat grey area caused by the difficulty that some harms may not be illegal. Harms, for example, such as cyberbullying, which although in theory could be prosecuted under the harassment legislation if serious. And the way that the legislation attempts to deal with this is by stating that industry is required to take action appropriate to the scale and severity of the harm in question, and that more stringent requirements will be imposed for harms that are clearly illegal. And those harms would, for example, include online child sexual abuse and child sexual exploitation. So in terms of the regulation, the regulator has to take a risk-based and proportionate approach. So any action that the regulator takes will be developed according to the size and resources of the company and the age of those at risk of harm, with more emphasis on children and young people. Each company within the scope of the legislative framework must ensure that terms and conditions apply with the duty of care that I referred to before. And there will be codes of practice, so industry must develop codes of practice, which must be sufficiently clear and accessible to all audiences, including children. And that's the case for all services that children use. So what can the regulator do? So the Regulator Ofcom has the power to require annual transparency reports from companies, which must include evidence of effective enforcement. The regulator can impose fines, disrupt business activity, block services, and impose liability on individual members of senior management for non-compliant organisations. So really the legislation is far-reaching. I just wanted to mention that additionally, the Information Commissioner's Age-Appropriate Design Code was implemented on the 2nd of September 2020. An organisation should be in compliance by the 2nd of September 2021. The key principles of this dovetail with the forthcoming online safety bill and are focused on the best interests of the child. So the recommendation is that the best interests of the child have to be at the forefront of design and development of online services used by children. Data protection impact assessments have to be undertaken by industry to assess and mitigate risks. These must account for age differences, capacities, and developmental needs. And I want to come back to that point a bit later on when we think about risk and harm. So the age-appropriate application is really important here. So industry must establish the age of users in a way that is not in conflict with the DIPA, or apply standards of the code to all users. I want to move on now, having thought about the policy and legislative framework, to looking at the interconnected framework of online risk and solutions that we've recently developed in research we've undertaken for the regulator. So I want to turn to consider the key challenge facing industry and the regulator. The difficulty of considering the scale and severity of harm. If we consider a spectrum of harms, for example, well, the very worst harms would include online child sexual abuse and child sexual exploitation. As we move towards the less serious end of the scale, examples might include online harassment or forms of online hate. However, although the line is clear at the sharp end, the most serious end, it becomes increasingly blurred as we move further into the grey area. And the experience of harm will, of course, be dependent upon other factors, including victim vulnerability, resilience, and the availability of support networks. Viewing pro-harm or anorexia sites may, for example, have no impact on some children, but may cause others a great deal of harm. We recently undertook research for the Regulator Ofcom on online harms to inform their guidance for VSPs and other industry on the protection of children from online harm. This is a copy of the report cover. So we began by considering the benefits, and the benefits, we all know what the benefits are, but I think we rarely look at the literature in this space. So we developed a series of broad categories of benefits: knowledge, connection, enjoyment, and expression. As we know, risks do not inevitably result in harm. But as Livingston et al. Point out, rather concern factors that raise the probability of harm to children. So not all risks result in harm. And some risk taking should be encouraged in children. Children aged 12 to 15 are more likely than adults to say they've experienced potential harms related to content and interaction, according to research undertaken by Ofcom. But I think one of the key issues that we discovered in the research we did for Ofcom was that children and young people at different developmental stages will have different vulnerabilities in both the real world and cyber contexts. And this has important implications for the study of risk and harm. Oh, here we go. So originally, Ofcom wanted us to provide a taxonomy of harms that was really correlated with different types of risks, but it proved impossible to do this for the reasons I outlined around, other variables, including the cognitive developmental stage of the child. So much is dependent upon other factors, not least the child, their age, their stage of development, as I said, and their experience of the specific harm. We developed instead an interconnected framework of risk, harm, and solutions. We developed broad categories of risk, which included, for example, sexual aggression and violence, self-injury, cyber deviance, and moral harms. Now, the issue of moral harms is somewhat controversial, but is included in the bill. So, it will be for the regulator to try and define what is meant by moral harms, and this is not easy. We then developed a series of harm categories. For example, cyber deviance included identity theft, hacking, cyber scams, and cyber fraud, malware and spyware. And this area really speaks to our current H2020 research, which is exploring young people's pathways into cybercrime. So we conceptualized the framework as a child's online pathway. We identified the risks alongside the benefits and potential solutions in the form of social and safety tech solutions. So in terms of social solutions, what we're talking about here is a range of social solutions, which include, for example, informal advice from teachers and parents, which may not be accurate or up to date, and educational awareness programs such as the Think You Know program run by CEOP, the NCA, and other similar interventions. So that's really social solutions. But I really want to move to focus on online safety tech in the UK, because I think this is an area of interest for the audience today. So, what is the safety tech sector? Well, we were commissioned to undertake this work by the DCMS, and the research was led by Perspective Economics. The safety tech sector refers to any organisation involved in developing technology or solutions to facilitate safer online experiences and to protect users from harmful content, contact, or conduct. So in this research, we aim to explore the current role and potential of the sector in the UK and to provide a market analysis, but also to establish a common definition. So what do we know about the sector? So we interviewed 70 organisations who identified as safety tech organisations who are currently active in the UK. There's been more recent research. This was conducted in 2020, and I think there are about 200 such organisations at the moment, so it's an expanding sector. And what we discovered was that these organisations often work at the highest security levels with law enforcement. The sector is very broad, includes industry, private sector, charities and public sector. The sector often works alongside industry, and basically organisations in this sector monitor, detect and share online harm threats in real time. They develop online platforms that are also age appropriate, actively identify and respond to instances of harm, sometimes very serious harm, child sexual abuse and child sexual exploitation, bullying, harassment and abuse. They offer software that filters, blocks and flags harmful content at a network or device level. Age verification is key in this sector as well, so verify and assure the age of users, detect and disrupt false, misleading or harmful narratives, and advise and support a community of moderators to identify and remove harmful online content. So on the basis of this work, we developed a taxonomy of safety tech solutions offered by UK companies and charities. So you'll see here, we looked at several levels of operation. So the first being system-wide level factors, which included, for example, tracing, locating and removing illegal content. So, for example, the Internet Watch Foundation, which is the UK watchdog that is responsible for the removal of child sexual abuse, indecent material. Platform level factors. So, for example, here we've got age appropriate design and ensuring that it's in keeping with ICO recommendations, the recommendations I went through before, age verification, and endpoint factors included user initiated protection, for example. So lots of different levels there, as you can see, of operation. Now, I think this is interesting because this is an area of significant growth, and I know it's an area that the government really wants to support. So when we did the research in terms of market worth total value of online safety tech companies, this was in excess of 500 million as of 2019. So we published in 2020, but the research was undertaken in 2019. And also at the time we said that the UK will witness its first potentially up to 4 unicorns in the near future. And I know there has been a unicorn since we did this work. So things have changed already since we undertook this work. So what are some of the challenges facing the sector? It's challenging for smaller firms to get in front of potential customers and to encourage take-up. There's a limited understanding among potential customers and investors because the focus has really been on cybersecurity rather than cyber safety. So, you know, it involves a kind of shifting thinking. For several of the early stage companies we spoke to, there's a need for business support to identify potential customers or market segments. Public procurement was cited regularly as one mechanism for small companies to test their product with their first customer, secure cash flow, and then refine their market approach. Across the consultations, investment was flagged as strong with respect to value and volume, but there was significant feedback regarding the state of investment in online safety technology. And this issue again, cybersecurity versus online safety, was a recurrent theme. And I think consultees felt that investors typically better understood cybersecurity as an addressable market that they could back compared to online safety, which seemed to be a more kind of soft market, you know, a more kind of child safety focused market. There was a gender issue as well for some of the female funded companies that we spoke to. There was a prevailing view that when pitching to investors, online safety can be viewed as soft or uncommercial for investors. So really picking up on the cyber security versus online safety issue. So what is needed in terms of future research in this area? So much research in this field still looks very broadly at screen time, at children and young people's screen time, digital devices, social media, or the internet, or going online generally. And I would argue that this is really redundant. We've done a lot of this research in the past. And it's really important now to focus, particularly if we're to understand risk and harm in the context of regulation and the forthcoming legislation. It's really important to focus on what activities children are actually undertaking online, rather than the amount of time they spend online, you know, because they may be online for a long time and actually doing research for school, but they may be online for a short time and accessing harmful content. In terms of methods, we've seen a lot of self-report research, and we need to adopt alternative research methods which enable researchers to make conclusions regarding causation. For example, some longitudinal, cross-sectional studies, advanced statistical analysis or modelling of empirical data, or perhaps some quasi-experimental research designs that could perhaps look at physiological and neurological response to harm stimuli. So in summary, the expanding safety tech sector is of central importance in the UK and internationally. And we're working with the US as well. There's a developing safety tech sector in the US. But it's really one aspect of prevention in the context of online harms. The UK is, I would say, introducing a strong regulatory framework, but there remain grey areas in respect of both legislation and current empirical evidence regarding the impact of different types of online harm upon children and young people. The importance of good underpinning research that really helps us to understand the relationship between risk and harm, effective policy and social solutions really cannot be overemphasized from my perspective. And I think that's really all I want to say. And I left some time for questions if people have any. Thanks, Virginia.